Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm going to share with you today a video that is not your typical video. Well, I don't want to say that because it's probably something that I'll talk about in the future frequently. Maybe not frequently, but definitely will be something that comes up. And it wasn't mentioned in my last sort of update catch-up video because I felt like it was something that needed its own space. So what I would like to discuss with you today, as you've probably figured out by the title of the video, is pregnancy loss. Specifically in my case, what they medically deem recurrent miscarriage. I have had 3 losses since September of 2021. So it's now December, but my 3rd loss occurred just 2 weeks shy of a year from the first loss. So I'm just going to talk about each of those babies that we lost. So I don't know, I'm gonna just start at the beginning. So we decided that we wanted to try for another baby, and we began trying in the spring of 2021, and we found out that we were pregnant in June. I got to 8.5 weeks, I think, and I was able to hear the heartbeat. I have an at-home Doppler, and then we had an ultrasound and we got to see him. My first ultrasound was around 12 weeks and 5 days, and everything was perfect. He was growing normally, his little heart was beating beautifully. Everything was just fine. We did the genetic testing, the maternity 21 that was offered, and that came back, and he was healthy. I mean, everything was perfect. The tests were perfect. There was no genetic markers for any conditions, no chromosomal abnormalities, none of those things. And we found out that he was a baby boy, and that, I want to say we found that out around the 13-week mark, because I think I had the blood work before I had the ultrasound. And then it took a little bit to come back. So it came back and he was a boy, a healthy boy. At 15 weeks and 5 days, we felt him kick for the first time. By we, I mean me. I don't know why I say we, because it was me. Tim couldn't feel it. He wasn't sitting there, first of all, and second of all, they're very little. But I was just so excited, and I texted my friend Ashley and said, you know, the baby kicked for the first time, and I was just so happy. At that time, we didn't have a name for him. We were still deciding, and it was still early, so we had time. The next morning at 5 weeks and 6 days, I went in for just a routine, like 16-week checkup. You know, they go in and they talk to you about your symptoms and how you're doing, and they measure your fundal height, and they listen for the baby's heartbeat, and you know, then send you on your way. And we had a discussion about me potentially needing to see, be referred to the maternal fetal medicine doctors in Columbia for a consult before I could be released to regular OBGYN care, because I was old, basically is what it was. Advanced maternal age is the official term for women over the age of 35, I think. Is that it? I don't know. It's been so long since I've been maternally old that I don't remember the age, but I think it's 35. Anyway, the appointment was going well, and the last thing was, okay, well, let's just, you know, take a quick listen to the baby's heartbeat. And I said, okay. And so I laid down, and the doctor got the Doppler, and he couldn't find it. And I'd been able to find it, but it had been lower, and I was like, well, he's not looking in the right spot. And I actually texted my friend. At the time, I was like, he's just not looking in the right spot. Now I have to go have an ultrasound. It's just annoying me. Like, I was so frustrated. And so we went to the ultrasound room, and I knew. Like, I instantly knew that something was wrong, because the ultrasound tech did not turn the screen to where I could see it. She did not turn the sound on, which is something they always do. I'd had ultrasounds before. I had 5 children at home. And so I knew pretty quickly that something was wrong. She completed the ultrasound just a really quick, I mean, it was a few minutes, I'm certain of it, but she completed that, and then she looked over at the doctor, and I just asked her, I said, he's gone, isn't he? And she said yes. And I took a few deep breaths and I was thinking, okay, you're fine. This is fine. It'll be okay. And then I just lost it. I couldn't wrap my head around the idea, because in my brain, once you got past that 6-week mark and you heard the heartbeat and the odds were so low, like the odds of something happening, and then you found out that, you know, chromosomally everything's fine and all the scans are fine, the chances of something happening to my baby, like in my brain, were non-existent. Like I couldn't wrap my head around it. I couldn't call Tim and tell him. The ultrasound tech asked if there was anything I needed, and I asked her if she would call my husband, and I gave her the phone number, because I just, in that moment, I physically could have made a phone call. Like I was not sobbing so hard that I couldn't breathe. I could have made a phone call. But in my soul, in my spirit, like I could not be the person that hurt my husband like that. And I knew that he was going to be hurt. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. So she called, I sat and waited. He was about 30 minutes away. So Tim showed up and we sat together. We talked with the doctor, and our next step was to either wait and see if I would miscarry on my own, if my body recognized that he was gone, or to be induced. I chose, for several reasons, to have an induction. So what the induction for me looked like was I arrived at the hospital the next morning. They checked me in very quickly. The nurses were all so sweet and so kind. They didn't make me wait around for anything. There was no let's wait and see or when the doctor gets here. They immediately started me on an IV. They started, they administered the Cytotec, which is the medication that starts causing your cervix to dilate and starts the labor. And it was very quick. I think they told me, you know, it can take a couple of hours, and within the first hour I started feeling heavier contractions, and I feel like I was contracting the evening before, but that's a whole other video. But the point is that I went in and they did the induction, and I felt my water break, and I had Tim go get the nurse, and we delivered our son. We got to hold him and, you know, just love on him as long as we wanted to. So he was born I would have been 16 weeks the day he was born. It was the day we found out, the day after we found out he passed. And I truly believe that that kick that I felt was one of the last movements he made. He was measuring 15 weeks and 3 days, so a few days behind where I would have felt him kick. But my experience has been since then that typically the baby's growth stops or slows before the baby actually passes, in my opinion, in my experience. So yeah, he was born in the hospital. We had him sent to the funeral home, and they cremated him, and we had a memorial for him. And it was just a very hard thing. I warred with feelings of, should we do a memorial? Like, is it silly to do a memorial? Will people think that it's stupid because, you know, he was only 16 weeks. He wasn't even viable, and all of these other things. But in the end, it doesn't matter. The memorial is not for, I mean, it's for my baby, but it's for me. You know what I mean? Like, memorials are for the people that are left behind. And so I'm grateful that we decided to do it, because it was a chance for the people that we love, who loved us and who loved our son, to come together and celebrate him. His name was Nathaniel Dean. We call him Nate, baby Nate. And he was born on September 14th. My second loss happened just a few months after Nate was born. We hesitated on whether or not we were going to try again, but it became clear to me after a few months of healing and prayer and just considering that we really did want to have another baby. We felt like we had we felt like our family wasn't complete. And so we got pregnant again in December. So it was 3 months. It was the third month after Nate had passed. My cycle returns very quickly, and it's so, like, it's almost surreal how quick it comes back. But my cycle returned. We got pregnant in December, and when I was about 5.5 weeks, it was on, I think, Martin Luther King Day. So it would have been like the 17th of January or something. I contracted COVID, and I was really sick. And I was around 5.5 weeks at that point. And so it was hard to distinguish for several weeks between pregnancy symptoms and COVID symptoms, because early pregnancy symptoms are, you know, extreme fatigue and just tiredness and brain fog and all of those things, which like the symptoms of early pregnancy and COVID, post-COVID they're the same: fatigue, brain fog, you know, like extreme fatigue. I was slightly nauseous off and on, but I wasn't eating a ton because I just wasn't hungry and I didn't have the energy. And like, those were all things that could have been pregnancy, it could have been COVID, you just don't know. When I had gotten to around 8 weeks, I was like, well, I'm really, you know, I'm feeling better. I'm not really nauseous anymore. That's so strange, but like, you know, I'll take it. Like, you don't have to be nauseated to have a healthy pregnancy. And of course, like, you know, there was in the back of my mind, I was like, okay, well, you know, hopefully everything's fine, because you know, after what happened with Nate, we were understandably nervous. When I was 8 weeks and 6 days pregnant, it was a Saturday, and I had gone to church. And when we returned home from church, I went to the bathroom and I noticed that I was spotting a little bit. I was also having like some tummy trouble that can cause, like, anything like that with your intestines, or like if you've had sex the night before, things like that could irritate your cervix or cause, you know, issues in the area. It can cause light spotting. So I was like, okay, well, maybe that's what it was. But it wasn't just the one wipe, it was, you know, consistent. And I was like, okay. I woke up the next morning, it was Sunday morning, February 13th, and I had passed a large clot, which, so when blood starts to pool, it can clot in like 5 minutes. So passing a clot is not necessarily like, holy crap, like what's going on? But I was like, okay, well, that means that I was bleeding more than just spotting. So I guess we'll watch that. Well, I had stood up and gone to the bathroom and passed that clot when I had stood up. And so, you know, I got up and took care of everything, changed my pad, went back to bed. And I was just kind of sitting there. And after a few minutes, I felt another large clot pass. And so I called Tim in and I said, hey, I don't know exactly what's happening right now, but I'm bleeding a lot, like a lot. I'm afraid that I'm having a miscarriage, but it could be a subchorionic hemorrhage. Like, I didn't know, and I didn't want to scare him or make him feel like, oh, you know, what, I don't know. Anyway, the point is I was like, you know, I was trying to be very calm about it. About 45 minutes later, and I was texting my friends too, and I was like, dude, you know, like, it's picking up, it's heavier. I'm concerned for the baby, but also, like, I don't know what's going on. Like, there's just so much bleeding, and like, they tell you all the time, like, you know, if you have more, and this is just like for women in general, like, you know, if you bleed, if you soak more than a pad an hour, you need to go seek medical attention. And I always wondered, like, well, how, like, I can't even imagine soaking it, but like, literally, I now know what that means. So it's like one of those things where when you know, you know. So we decided, I called labor and delivery at the hospital because I didn't have necessarily an OBGYN yet. I hadn't seen anybody for this pregnancy. I had an appointment the next morning for a dating ultrasound and a checkup and blood work. But I hadn't seen them yet. So I called labor and delivery and was like, hey, I haven't actually seen my doctor yet, but they, you know, they work with you guys. What do we do? And they told me, you know, well, this is the doctor on call. And I was nervous because he was the doctor that I had started to see with Henry, but I didn't really click with him. And I was like, oh man, I don't want to see this doctor, but I don't have no choice. So I just asked my friends to pray that it would go well with him, that there would be no like tension or friction, and it wouldn't, you know, that it would be fine. By the time we got up and got into the car, I quickly realized that something was very wrong. I changed, I put on like a fresh, like one of those heavy overnight postpartum type pads, and, you know, a new pair of underwear and a new pair of pants. And I put those on and I got in the car, like literally, like stood up from the toilet, put those things on and went to the car. And it's about a 6-minute drive to the ER from where we were living at the time. And I got in the car, we were driving, we got to the ER, we parked. And when I got out of the car at the ER, I stood up and bled so much that it literally soaked through my pad, through my underwear, through my pants, and was actually like dripping. Like that's how heavily I was bleeding. And so I was like, okay, this is bad. And because of the state of like where my brain was at, I told him, I'm like, we have to go home. Like, I need to change my clothes. I can't go in there like this. This is awful. I feel bad for them. And he's like, dude, we're at the emergency room where people go when they're bleeding heavily. It's sort of why it's there. You're going in there, and like his attitude was kind of like, you're either gonna walk in there or I'm carrying you over my shoulder. Like, we're not getting back in the car. Because at that point he was like, he told me later, he was like, dude, it was bad. Like, it was bad. So we got into the ER. They very quickly triaged me and got me back to a room. They came in, they drew blood, at the time that they drew my labs, I was hematologically stable, which means that I had not lost enough blood to need a transfusion, but I was borderline. Like, I can't remember what the number is and whatever, but it was like, I think like the threshold is like 12.5 for hemoglobin, and mine was like 12.3, or no, it's 12.3, and mine was like 12.5, so it was like 0.2 points over where I would need a transfusion. That was when I first got there. And about 3 hours later, 2 hours later, is when they were like, okay, well, you know, we can send you home and see if this slows down because you were hematologically stable, but we'd have to rerun the labs and make sure, or we can do a D&C. And I was like, do the D&C. Like, I can't go back home like this. It'll terrify my children. I'm terrified. I didn't feel good. I felt weak and shaky. I was scared. Tim was scared. And so we had done an ultrasound, and, you know, there was no signs of a baby in my uterus. They couldn't see anything, but you could see the bleed on the ultrasound, like that you could actively see the bleed on the ultrasound too. So we went in, I had the surgery. The post-surgical report revealed that they found tissue that was consistent with a pregnancy of 5 to 5.5 weeks. So right around the time I got COVID was when we lost the baby. That one was hard. It was hard emotionally because I'd lost another baby, but I was kind of like, well, I guess this is just like, it sucks. It is what it is. But, you know, in my brain, it was like, okay, well, we don't know what happened with Nate. It was a freak thing. It wasn't supposed to happen, but we don't know why it happened. Like, it was just one of those things. And this baby we lost because, you know, I got COVID and I was so sick when I was early in pregnancy, and severe illness can cause, you know, miscarriages. And so it was kind of like, it sucked and it was hard, but it was like, okay, but it'll be okay. You know, we can still have a baby. I just need to work on recovering, because the recovery of losing that much blood and rebuilding your blood volume was a lot in its own. It was exhausting. I remember going to our women's retreat for church like 3 weeks later, 3 or 4 weeks later, and I still was like, I would get so winded so easily. Like, it was hard to breathe because my body was still trying to rebuild the blood volume, and your blood is what oxygenates you and helps you, you know, function. So that was really hard, but it was different because it just, I don't know if it's because I had gone through everything with Nate and had so much healing, and, you know, just through prayer and the support of my community and my friends and my loved ones, or what it was, but that one wasn't emotionally as hard on me, I guess. It was still sad, but it's almost like the fear, like, oh my gosh, I could have bled out. Like, this was really bad. Like, I had to have surgery to stop a hemorrhage that, had I let go, would have killed me. That, like, I feel like that sort of overshadowed the panic, or the sadness, you know, like that panic sort of overshadowed it. And so then when we were removed from it, like, I was able to kind of grieve, but not in the immediate urgent sense that you kind of do when a tragedy first happens. And so that was our baby Violet. She was born February 13th. The third loss that we suffered was a little girl. We were trying again. We decided we wanted to try again, but we had a very specific time frame when we could try, because we have a trip coming up in June for Emma's 16th birthday, and then there's, you know, like, I didn't want to be so pregnant that I couldn't go, or so soon postpartum that it would be hard for me to go. And so we kind of had to time it. And I was praying, Lord, just let me get pregnant this month. This is the last month that we can try. Just let me get pregnant this month. It also happened to be the same time that Tim got a new job. He lost his old job, got a new job, and started his new job before we were able to find a home and move. So we were sort of living apart, I guess. He would come home on the weekends, and then he would leave Sunday and work through the week, and then come home, and he'd be home. He was working 4 days a week, so he'd be home Friday and Saturday, and then he'd leave Sunday again. And it was, I mean, it was hard, but it was like, you know, we had tried. Ovulation timing happened to line up with when he was home, and a few weeks later I took a test and I found out I was pregnant. I thought there might have been a line on Sunday before he left, but I didn't want to say anything and have him get excited and then disappoint him when it wasn't positive for sure. Because that's kind of like, I do that where, like, I kind of guard him. Like, I don't want him, like, I'm like, if both of us are, like, if I'm going to be upset, there's no reason for him to be hurt too. And that's just kind of always been my mindset and my mentality and the way that I do things. So, I didn't say anything. Monday morning, there was clearly a positive. And so I called him. did I call him or did I text him? I can't remember. He was at work. Oh no, he was at work. I video called him and told him, I think I held up the test. I'm like, are you on speakerphone? He's like, no. And I was like, okay, I have to show you something. He's like, okay. And I showed it to him and he just grinned and he was so excited. And it was just like, it's adorable the way that he gets so excited, like, about pregnancies. Anyway, we, so I knew I was pregnant and we hadn't really said it. I mean, we'd mentioned it to people, like, you know, okay, we got past the 6-week mark and I was like, okay, we're 6 weeks. Like, this is great. We had mentioned it to some people and I went in exactly at 7 weeks, or maybe I was a day shy of 7 weeks, and did a blood test that you can do. I found out she was a girl. I was 7 weeks and 1 day, I think, when I got the results back for the labs, or 7 weeks and 2 days. Anyway, whatever. I got the labs back and we found out she was a girl. We were excited, but that was also kind of tainted. We had spent the day, all weekend really, trying to get our other house. We had closed on this house, or we had moved into this house that weekend. They had let us move in before we closed. So we moved in that weekend and then we were back at the other house just trying to clean up and finish painting and do all of these things. And, you know, I was just really nauseated and I was, you know, tired, and our dog had gone into labor and had puppies literally 2 days, the day we were loading the U-Haul to move into this house. There was just a lot. But, you know, we were all working and I had gone to the store with my friend Ashley after a long day of doing stuff, just to grab a few things before we hit the road to go back home. And I was so nauseated. I was like, oh, it's starting. I'm getting sick. Like, but it was almost like, yay, I'm nauseated. Like, this is a good sign. And that was the same day that we found out that she was a girl on the ride home. Unfortunately, between going to the store and that ride home, I had asked Tim to stop because I felt like something just felt weird. So we stopped at Target. We had 2 separate cars and we stopped at Target and I went to the bathroom. I went in and went to the bathroom and I was spotting very, very lightly, very, very lightly, just like faint pink when I wiped, very lightly spotting. And so I came back out and I told him, hey, listen, I'm spotting. It might be nothing. It's barely anything when I wipe, but can you go inside and buy me some pads? I don't want to walk around. I just want to sit. And, you know, then when we get home, I'll take it easy and rest because there's been a lot going on. And so he did, and we drove home and I got the email and I was so excited. And I came home and went to bed and it was barely anything. Like, it never picked up to like more than when I wiped. And then there was a point where there was like a little bit that got on the pad, but it was hardly anything. But it wouldn't slow down. And so the next day I decided, okay, let's go to the emergency room. I hadn't established care with an OBGYN here yet. So we went to the emergency room. I told them what was happening. We waited forever, because I wasn't like hemorrhaging or anything. It was just, you know, we waited forever. They took us back. They did an ultrasound and they said, well, we see cardiac activity. It was called questionable cardiac activity because the baby was so small and so early and I have a tilted uterus. And they're like, well, we can't get a tone. We can't hear it, but we can see the cardiac activity. And like Tim could see on the screen, her little heart beating. But I was measuring. I was 7 weeks and 4 days that day. And I was measuring. They said, well, you know, you're measuring 6 weeks and 2 days. I'm like, that's not possible. Like, well, you know, people get their dates wrong, but I knew my dates. I knew exactly when I ovulated and when we had conceived because there was a very limited time window, but I also know my body. Like, I knew my dates. And so in my head, in my heart, I knew that something was wrong. I tried to hold out hope, like maybe, you know, with a tilted uterus and when the babies are so early, it's so hard, like just a millimeter off can be weeks, you know, in measurements. And so I stayed in bed for a week. The next day after we had seen cardiac activity, they had drawn a beta and it was like 4,800 or no, what was it? 12,000. It was like 12,000 or 14,000 or somewhere in there. So it was really good. Like, that's a good number for gestationally where I was. So we just kind of went home and, you know, bed rest and wait. And I called a local OBGYN and they got me in for an ultrasound the following Wednesday and just told me to go in for labs for a repeat beta on Thursday because I had gone in on Tuesday and then they wanted me to go on Thursday for the blood draw. And I was like, okay. So we didn't get the labs because it was Labor Day weekend and the office was closed. And so we had to wait to get those results. And everybody was really like frustrated. Like my friends were frustrated and they were mad for me that they didn't give them to me. And that was, you know, that was really insensitive. And I mean, I don't disagree with them, but I kind of was like, I'm okay. Like, it's fine. If we don't get them, it's fine, whatever. Like, because in my brain, them not telling me meant I could maybe pretend a little longer. The night after we had been at the ER and seen the questionable cardiac activity, I had a few moments of just horrific pain, like so bad. Like when you get like gas pain, you know, sometimes it is just so bad. Like you're like, holy Lord, is something, like, am I gonna die? Like, this is awful. Is something tearing inside of me? It was literally like that kind of pain. It was for about 30 minutes. And I passed a few pretty sizable clots, but other than those clots, there was like no bleeding. It was nothing. Like, it was just minimal. Like, I wouldn't even call it like a regular period bleeding, like maybe like early days spotting of a period. But it hurt bad enough that Tim was like, after what had happened with Violet, he was like, no, let's go. We're going back to the ER. We're gonna tell, you know. And so we told them what had happened, that I was in a lot of pain and that I was bleeding and whatever. And we sat there for like 2 hours. And I hadn't even seen a doctor yet. I hadn't had an ultrasound. I hadn't seen a doctor. They hadn't drawn labs. I think I'd done a urinalysis and that was it. So I don't actually, maybe I didn't even get to that. They literally had just checked me and taken my vitals. So anyway, I was like, I'm going home. This is dumb. I'm not in pain anymore. I'm not bleeding. I'm not passing any more clots. Like, I can sit at home as well as I can sit here, and I didn't want to be there. So we went home. And it ended up not mattering. That was the night at home when I was in pain. That was the night, that moment was when our baby was born. That was when she came. And I think because I knew, I had already kind of made peace with it. I didn't, I grieved and I was sad and it was hard. But it's always going to be sad. It's always going to be hard. Like, this is never a thing that is going to get easier. You know what I mean? It's not like you get used to it or you figure it out or whatever. Like, it's always going to be sad. It's always going to be hard. Physically, the recovery was different because I had already been in bed resting for an entire week before we had the confirmation ultrasound. So my body had had a chance to really rest and recover. It's been hard because it almost feels like outside of me and, you know, my husband and my closest friends. Like, it's like, oh, that's just a thing that Amy does. It's a thing that happens. I'm really sorry. My cat's climbing through the blinds trying to say hello through the window. It feels like it's almost like people just expect it. Like, oh, well, you know, she's had another miscarriage. Like, oh, okay. And it's almost like, not that the babies don't matter, but it feels that way. Like, it feels like they start to be less important. And that's not on the people around me. And it's not, I'm not saying I'm making that up, but it's just, it is one of those things where, like, when you've had recurrent losses, it starts to feel like people just expect, like, that's your thing. Like, that's just what happens. Oh, you know, she's had another loss. It's so sad. Isn't it so sad? She keeps having miscarriages. It's so sad. But it's not quite the same. And so it's very easy to feel like, oh, well, I guess my baby doesn't matter that much. You know, or, you know, oh, there's people that are going through this for the first time and it's awful for them. And I remember how awful it was the first time. I remember how bad it was, oh, gosh. And so it's very easy for me to be like, I know exactly what you're going through. You know, this is so awful. And for me to be like, no, I'm not going to talk about it because you don't want, even if it's somebody who's on their 5th or 6th or 10th miscarriage, you don't want to be the person that's like, oh yeah, well, when I had mine, you know, let me talk about me. Let me bring it back to me, because you don't want to take that from them. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to seem like you're talking over them and trying to be more important. And so it's hard. It's hard. So that was our baby, Sophie. Sophie Marie. Emma gave her the middle name Marie. It's my middle name. And she thought that since Henry's middle name is Aaron, which is Tim's middle name, that I should be honored too. And I thought that was really sweet. So Sophie Marie was born August 30th, just 2 weeks before Nate's birthday. He was born September 14th. So those are our 3 babies that we have loved and lost, and it's still sad. I still miss them. I will always miss them. It's never gonna not be sad. It's never gonna not be sad. But we're doing okay. We're moving forward, you know. It's been 3.5 months. No, I guess just a little over 3 months. Since Sophie was born, and we're doing good. We're doing okay. You know, we're focusing on doing some things to get healthy and moving forward, what that looks like for us. Planning our trip coming up for Emma for her 16th birthday. We have a lot of things going. Yeah, I feel like each loss it's been its own experience, but it's also like, with all the pain, there has come healing, and with the healing, there's come refinement, and there's come growth in me. And so I am grateful for everything that my babies have given me in this life, even though their lives were so painfully short. I'm not grateful for my losses. That's not what I'm saying. You can find gratefulness and joy and provision and peace in the bad things, in spite of the bad things, not because of them. I don't find joy and peace and I don't see God's provision in the death of my child, but I see all of those things in spite of the fact that there was that loss. I see where his provision and where his grace and where his love and where kindness and joy and growth and healing, I see all of those things amongst the sadness and pain. I hope that this video, that my sharing, that my stories help somebody, that if you're going through the same thing, that you know that you're not alone, that if your feelings you know, are different than what you expected, that you know that that's okay, and that maybe somebody can just find purpose and validation from my experiences, and just know that even if you feel alone, if you feel unseen, I see you and I hear you, and I'm always willing to listen. Until next time, I hope that everybody is well, and I will see you soon. Bye.